Hello and welcome to the news. To present, my name is Jeffrey Ziambo. Top stories in the news. Home Affairs Minister Stephen Kampiongo says government has no intentions of turning Zambia into a totalitarian state. Housing and Infrastructure Development Minister Ronald Chitotela says President Edgar Lungu's use of the Bemba idiom "Ubomba Muibala, Alia Muibala" has been misinterpreted. Transparency International Zambia is opposed to calls to remove the presidential immunity from the Republican Constitution. The news in detail. Home Affairs Minister Stephen Kampiongo says the PF government has no intentions of turning Zambia into a totalitarian state. Mr. Kampiongo says his ministry will, however, continue to implement and enforce the Public Order Act in its current form. He has told QTV News that people should not complain about the act, but rather follow its provision to avoid being in conflict with the laws of the land. Mr. Kampiongo says those who are not happy with the current form of the Public Order Act were given an opportunity by the Minister of Justice to make submissions towards the revision of the Act. He says as long as there are no changes to the Act, it will be implemented and enforced as it is.
What we do at Home Affairs is to implement and enforce the laws as they exist. The Minister of Justice has spoken about this matter, asking stakeholders to bring ideas on how they want to what sort of changes they want to see in the Public Order Act or its implementation. For us, we enforce the law as it is, and at the end of the day, whichever way we are going to do, it's just changing, but the principle need of the law still stands. There's no country which operates without its laws to manage public order. Mind you, this is the only piece of legislation that manages the conflict between order and freedom. Just as much as you are free to do your work, it must be done within certain parameters. So where your rights end, that's where someone's right starts.
Pambashe PF Member of Parliament Ronald Chitotela says people have misinterpreted President Edgar Lungu's use of the Bemba idiom, "Ubomba Muibala, Alia Muibala." Mr. Chitotela, who had accompanied the president to the Copper Belt, has told journalists in Lusaka that the media only picked the idiom without explaining the context it was used. He says President Lungu was urging the PF provincial leadership to ensure the monies received from the donor community for the construction of the party provincial administration block should factor in the management fee, which is 10%. He says they should not eat what is not for them apart from the 10% management fee. Mr. Chitotela states that it is unfortunate that the media in question only cut from the Bemba idiom to twist it and sound as if the president was encouraging his ministers or any other official to steal public funds. Mr. Chitotela, who is also Housing and Infrastructure Development Minister, says the president has already demonstrated his resolve to end misuse of public funds during the workshop for ministers and controlling officers last week.
As you may be aware, I'm a specialist in the Bemba province. I want to speak to you, the media, to carry the story as it was said. The issue of just picking a statement, then you cut and post that, it doesn't help. The statement in its full context meant you, the provincial party, the money we are receiving from the donors to construct the infrastructure for for the party administration. If you have not factored in the management fee, that is 10%, don't eat the money that is meant for the project. Of course, we appreciate that as we implement the project, you need to be paid, you need to eat, but you should factor in a contingency maybe of 10%, so that as you are implementing in that 10%, you should be able then to get a reward for implementing the project, because the Bemba says, as you are implementing the project, you need to be paid out of the 10% contingency, not within the amount of implementation of the project. And he had actually said it in Bemba. Nga waliembuto atupantu ichibe mbata chile banangu bomba mwibara alia mwibara pantu kuti waliembuto ero wafirefia kusombora. But because of the hidden agenda, people choose to cut this and that and just speak bomba mwibara alia mwibara without explaining in the context in which it was said. As you
Opposition National Democratic Congress NDC Deputy Secretary General Mwenya Musenge has challenged President Edgar Lungu to back his words against corruption with action. President Edgar Lungu, during the Ministers and Controlling Officers Workshop on Prudent Financial Management Practices organized by the Ministry of Finance, expressed concern that the law enforcement agencies are slow in following up cases relating to misuse of public funds. President Lungu further warned those entrusted with management of public funds that no one will find refuge in him when found wanting, saying he wants to work with honest and accountable people. But Mr. Musenge has argued that a lot more than words is needed to give meaning to President Lungu's fight against corruption. He says there is no guarantee that corruption investigations will not be interfered with by the government of the day. Mr. Musenge has accused President Lungu of being in the forefront championing corruption. And Party of National Unity, PNU, says President Edgar Lungu's use of the Bemba idiom, Ubomba Mwibala Alia Mwibala, gives legitimacy to corruption in government. President Lungu is reported to have said this at a peer fundraising dinner dance for the construction of the Patriotic Front Convention Center in Ndola. PNU National Secretary Kasote Singogo has challenged the head of state to give a clear explanation of what he meant, saying people who understand the idiom have taken it that he is encouraging theft in government. Mr. Singogo tells Q News that it is unfortunate that such remarks could come from the head of state.
As long as he basically was saying, as long as he does not eat the capital. Now, such words coming from a head of state, firstly, as Party of National Unity, we say those comments are very unfortunate. Because what the president meant, in our understanding, in that statement, is basically giving legitimacy to corruption. And we find that of great exception. We as a Party of National Unity have this advice to the president. He who lives by the sword dies by the sword. And we want to make that very clear. He who lives by the sword dies by the sword. Such a statement to say, that comment really, we take great exception. It's not a statement that must come from a head of state. We believe that such a statement basically gives legitimacy to corruption. And we would ask that such a statement, an explanation is made to what the president himself made. And we want also to remind His Excellency, Edgar Lungu, he is running a country, for goodness sake. He is running a country. He is not running some little shop somewhere in some corner of Zambia. He's running a country. And all of us as stakeholders have a stake in this country. And when he speaks, he must speak as a statesman. And clearly the statement, that is not a statement like a statement.
Transparency International Zambia has opposed calls for the removal of presidential immunity from the Republican Constitution. Recently, Zambia Council for Social Development, ZCSD, called on Zambians to demand for the removal of presidential immunity from the Constitution in order to ensure that the presidency is also answerable to the judicial processes. But TIZ Chapter President Ruben Lifuka says what is needed is for the various stakeholders to offer appropriate checks and balances on how executive powers are used by the president. In an interview with Q News, Mr. Lifuka says offering checks and balances on how the president uses his executive powers is important in ensuring that powers vested in him are not used for personal gain. He adds that the president's executive powers must be confined to execution of national duties. Mr. Lifuka states that it is wrong for the president to use executive immunity for personal gain.
Executive immunity is always important in the execution of power in any setup, and you can look at all democracies around the world, even the old democracies, particularly when executive immunity is used in public interest. What is wrong is to use executive immunity for personal gain, and I think that's where we need to provide appropriate checks and balances, so that executive immunity, which the president enjoys in this particular instance, is confined to the execution of national duties, security, promotion of security and peace, as opposed to using presidential immunity to undertake any illegal acts. And I think there are sufficient laws, and we wouldn't want to support carte blanche, the proposal by Zambia Council, because there are sufficient laws that would deal with criminality, even of a serving president. However, what we should be saying is we need to find a mechanism to ensure that checks and balances on the exercise of this executive immunity so that it is not abused for personal gain. Executive immunity.
Police in Lusaka have arrested and charged 2 UTH Cancer Diseases Hospital employees for pilferage of drugs worth over 19,000 kwacha. According to a close source who sought anonymity, the suspects were arrested when they went to sell the medicine to the supplier, who apparently supplied the same drugs to Medical Stores Limited. And Lusaka Division Police Commissioner Nelson Piri has confirmed the arrests, identifying the 2 pharmacists involved as Simon Mwape and Graham Chintu, who were arrested on Wednesday last week. Mr. Piri says the duo was arrested together with another Congolese businessman, identified as John Mukeba, whom they were acting together with when they stole and attempted to sell the drugs. He explains that the trio approached their would-be customer in an attempt to sell him the drugs without knowing that he was the one who supplied the hospital with the drugs in question. Mr. Piri says Mwape and Chintu have been charged with theft by public servant, while Mukeba has been charged with theft. Government has called for transparency and accountability practices to ensure prudent management of resources in the implementation of the programs in the public sector. Office of the Vice President Permanent Secretary in charge of administration, Stephen Mwansa, says there is need to integrate national values of integrity, transparency and accountability in order to address corruption, self-serving and management of funds meant for the people, especially the poor and vulnerable in society. Speaking during the official opening of a stakeholders meeting on promoting integrity, transparency and accountability in poverty and vulnerability reduction programs, Mr. Mwansa has also called on stakeholders to observe and implement programs that are aligned to national values as enshrined in the amended Constitution of 2016.
It is therefore befitting that this workshop is not only targeting implementing agencies in the public sector, but also partners working alongside government. It is for this reason that we also have in our midst the cooperating partners, private sector, faith-based and religious organizations, as well as civil society organizations. Therefore, as we implement our programs, let us guard against tendencies that undermine values aforementioned. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this important workshop would not have come at a better time than now, when we are beginning the full implementation of the 7th National Development Plan. This gives me an opportunity to thank our cooperating partners, led by the government of Finland, through the embassy in Zambia, who have partnered with government to host this event. It is therefore...
Speaking at the same event, Ministry of Community Development and Social Welfare Permanent Secretary Howard Sikwela says with 700,000 vulnerable people expected to benefit from the social cash transfer scheme in 2018, there is urgent need to see to it that all the funds reach the beneficiaries.
You realize that under the social cash transfer, the ministry or government through the Ministry of Community Development and Social Services is intending to reach out to 700,000 households. That's under the social cash transfer. Then when it comes to food security pass, government intends to reach 80,000 households. So meaning that colossal sums of money will be spent. And the whole idea is these resources should reach the intended targets. And as we do that, we should be mindful of leakages. And the workshop of this nature is very welcome. So to you facilitators and cooperating partners, we say, well done.
Unfinished Ambassador to Zambia, Timo Okonen, is happy with the manner the social cash transfer scheme is being implemented. Mr. Okonen says the results are very promising and that the commitment government is showing in implementation of the social protection is commendable. Christians Against Poverty in Zambia, CAPI's founder, Evangelist Gregory Cheleshe, has advised the PF government to use power for the betterment of the country so that even when they leave office, they will be remembered. Evangelist Chileshe says it is important that people remember those in office when they have gone that they managed to change their lives. He is encouraging the PF government to work extra hard and leave a good legacy behind. Evangelist Chileshe tells Q News that the PF must avoid politics of intimidating opponents and focus on transforming the country. Former Association for Building and Civil Engineering Contractors President Michael Nyirenda is hopeful that government will consider turning the 20% subcontraction policy into law so that it becomes more effective. Mr. Nyirenda, who is also a local contractor, tells Q News that it is easier to effectively implement a law than a policy, which is why it has been a challenge to implement the 20% subcontracting policy because it is only at policy stage. He says government can learn from other countries how this policy has worked and implement it in Zambia. And Mr. Nyirenda is optimistic that once fully implemented, the 20% subcontraction policy will speak to the needs of the local contractors in the country.
Because it's on a policy, it's been difficult to implement because it's on at policy level. You know, only laws can be implemented, and if people feel that they've not been implemented, then people can either try and find out why, even go to court. But you may not go to court to enforce a policy because it's on a policy. So we've actually been urging that if government can put that into law, probably will be taking one step towards actual implementation. To answer your question, the 20% has not been because, even though I'll bring you back to the fact that under the CEC Act, it's also there about reservation. So we need to actually to read this together with the 20% and the CEC's reservation scheme. But I'll tell you what the CEC reservation scheme talks about. It talks about
ZESCO Limited says it received over 600 reports of faults in the last 4 days in Lusaka alone. Mr. Kapata says it is always a challenge for the power utility to work on faults whenever it is raining, hence the delay in working on the faults. He says the installation of optic fiber will make it easy for the ZESCO to monitor areas with faults even before they are reported. And Mr. Kapata says ZESCO is waiting to hear from the Zambia Meteorological Department on how much rainfall the country will receive this year to be able to know whether power generation will be affected. To end the news, we'll take a look at stories making headlines. Home Affairs Minister Stephen Kampyongo says government has no intentions of turning Zambia into a totalitarian state. Housing and Infrastructure Development Minister Ronald Chitotela says President Edgar Lungu's use of the Bemba idiom "Uvomba Mwibala alia Mwibala" has been misinterpreted. And Transparency International Zambia is opposed to calls to remove the presidential immunity from the Republican Constitution. That's all we had in our news. My name is Jeffrey Ziambo. Bye-bye.